Hello, this is the content video for Biology, Unit 2, Section 5. We're going to be talking about the 4 types of macromolecules in a cell, what makes them up, and kind of what they do. Also, I heard a few people talk about how they couldn't quite see my cursor in the last video or so I made a bigger one and figured out how to do that. So hopefully the quality will improve as we keep going. Remember, send me feedback on these in emails. I can work with them. All right, so carbohydrates are one of the most prevalent types of macromolecules. Macro meaning big, right? So these are just big molecules. They are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So carbon is represented with the symbol C, hydrogen with a H, and oxygen with an O. So this here is the ratio of carbon to hydrogen to oxygen in a carbohydrate. And so this system will repeat a certain amount of times, right? Because they will continue linking with one another at the carbon, right? Kind of like this, right? So if we ignore this hydrogen for now, we've got a carbon, this black thing, one oxygen, this red thing, and 2 hydrogens, right? Because the oxygen can bond to more stuff and the carbon can bond to something else, they can continue to link to one another, all right? So in this case, this carbon has bonded to another carbohydrate part, another carbohydrate part, another one, and so on and so forth. Oxygen tends to bind to another hydrogen, making this an OH group, an oxygen-hydrogen group, or a hydroxide group. Right, within carbohydrates, we have a few different types of polymers, polymers being another word for this long chain that looks the same if you bring it down to the individual links. So monosaccharides, something you might have heard about with food, right? Monosaccharides are when this little N here, it contains between 3 and 7. So this here, this example is a monosaccharide, right? And these are just simple sugars as well as glucose, all right, which is what's on the right side of the screen. So remember, we just talked about glucose as part of our photosynthesis and cellular respiration lessons. Same thing. All right, so disaccharides. Remember, mono means 1, di means 2. So disaccharides is about twice as many here, and poly is anything longer than a disaccharide. All right? These are not as important. I really want you to get the idea that monosaccharides are shorter than disaccharides, which are shorter than polysaccharides. Carbohydrates are mainly an energy source. Right? We just talked about cellular respiration, how they can be broken down into energy and create ATP from oxygen and water, and carbon dioxide and light get added in with photosynthesis, right? But they can also be used as structural support. Remember when we talked about the types of cells that are in fungi, we said that they might have chitin, which is just a carbohydrate that also has nitrogen in it. And plant cell walls have cellulose, right? That's what makes like celery crunchy, is the cellulose. Right? The next type is lipids. So lipids contain carbon and hydrogen with some oxygen usually. Right? So lipids are fats. They also are present in oils or waxes, and they are in energy storage, right? Like if you burn fat or wax or oil, a lot of heat is given off, right? So we've got carbohydrates, which are an energy source, lipids, which are an energy storage, all right? Combine those two together and you get something like a potato chip, which is one of the best ways to start a fire if you need kindling, like in the woods, camping. There are 2 primary types of lipids or fatty acids. They are called saturated and unsaturated fats. Again, this is another term that we see on like nutrition labels, right, with foods. So the difference between saturated and unsaturated fats here are in the images below me on the screen. So again, we have hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon, but mostly carbon and hydrogen, right? So if it's a straight chain where the carbon is just bound one to another like this, it is a saturated fatty acid. So it's containing as much hydrogen as possible. If, however, some of these carbons are linked together a little bit stronger, we'll get a bent chain, right? So you can see the difference here is that these two carbon are, instead of being bound to individual hydrogens, they're bound to each other. And next year, if you take chemistry, we'll talk even more about that. You should have talked a little bit about it in physical science last year. Right, so this bent chain is an unsaturated fatty acid. So unsaturated means there's more hydrogens that can be bonded to it. A saturated fatty acid, we've got as many hydrogens as possible. Right? Lipids also play an important role in cells. So when we talked about the cell membrane or the plasma membrane for cells, we were talking about a phospholipid bilayer. All right, so a phospholipid is one of these things towards the bottom of the screen here. And we're talking about something that has a polar head, which is hydrophilic, bonded to a saturated fatty acid and an unsaturated fatty acid. It gives it this head and like two tails shape we've got going on down here. So a bilayer is one like this and one like this, all right? So together, they make up the cell membrane. I know we didn't dive too much into that, and we're not going to. But I want you to take away here is that the polar head, which is hydrophilic, it likes water, versus the fatty acids, which don't like water, hydrophobic, make up the cell membrane. All right? So philic, like friends, phobic, like fear. All right? You also see lipids in steroids, the medicines, right? And so this is things like cholesterol and hormones as well. And so these are sometimes good, sometimes bad. A lot of times lipids get a poor reputation kind of thing because nobody wants to be fat, right? But they are good for you in a way. You do need a little bit of fat in your body. You need lipids on a molecular level because they allow your body to do things, all right? You'll get more into hormones either later this year or in health class, all right? But we also have things like vitamin D, estrogen, testosterone, things that do things in your body, all right? They perform a function in the body. So if we don't have them, we get sick. All right, this gets a little complicated here, so hang with me. All right, we will dive more into DNA and RNA later. For now, we're just talking about these structures. All right, so the third type of macromolecule I want you to know about is a nucleic acid. So nucleic acid, right? They are a complex macromolecule made of repeating nucleotides. All right, so nucleotides are these things down here in the corner. All right, it is a phosphate group bound to a sugar, so a carbohydrate plays a part in a nucleic acid, plus what's called a nitrogenous base. So this thing has nitrogen in it. See this in here? So this plus a sugar plus a phosphate makes one nucleic acid. You put a bunch of those together, and you can get DNA or RNA. All right, so DNA, again, so we've got these same shapes here, phosphate, sugar, nitrogenous base, phosphate, sugar, nitrogenous base. So same thing here. These gray spheres or circles are the phosphate groups. These hexagons, right, 5 sides, yeah, hexagons are blue, and they are the sugars. The nucleic bases are all these things in the middle, all right? Because the nucleic bases are attracted to one another, they'll pull together, all right? And you get this ladder shape, which then twists, because of a few other factors we're not going to worry about right now. It twists and makes this double helix of DNA. DNA is called deoxyribonucleic acid. So right there at the end, nucleic acid, right? DNA is our genetic material for humans. So it is the instructions to make a person, right? RNA is very similar. Okay, again, we've got this circle of a phosphate group, a sugar, and a nucleic acid. But this is a different group of nucleic acids. Some of them are the same, some of them are different, right? We've got a C, a G, an A, and a U, which is cytosine, guanine, adenosine, and uracil. Whereas in DNA, we've got A, T, G, and C, so adenosine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. So the T's go away and you get U's instead. You don't need to know that right now, I'm just talking, right? So we've got this same ladder structure, but they don't join together, all right? RNA is used to make proteins, all right? So these RNA groups are part of the process to make proteins, right? Proteins are what actually starts to do things in the body, right? It's not just meat. Okay, I know that we talked about carbohydrates. Those aren't just bread. Lipids, they're not just fats. Proteins are not just meat. All right, so if you use your RNA to make proteins, you are combining together a bunch of amino acids, right? And they form a chain kind of like this, all right? That chain is twisted and coiled and folded a few times, right? We've got a single fold that is like a spin. We continue to spin that farther and we get a polypeptide chain that's called a tertiary structure. And then if you like start to fold that and crumple it, you can get what's called a quaternary structure or a fourth structure, which is just a full assemblage of that protein. You can kind of model this if you take a piece of yarn or thread or like a shoelace and twist it between your fingers. You'll see it start to coil, that kind of thing. All right, so proteins are a bunch of amino acids joined together that will do things in the body, right? They have a lot of different functions, so many that we cannot go over them right now, all right? But if it is a protein that speeds up a chemical reaction, we call that an enzyme, all right? And by speeding up a reaction, we make certain reactions possible even. So without enzymes, sometimes these reactions can't even happen, right? So being able to turn on or turn off enzymes allows your body to control what happens within it. Some of the ways that it does that are through pH. So if it's acidic or alkaline, sometimes called basic, or if it's hot or cold, the temperature change. This is why you get a fever when you're sick, because your body's trying to turn off some enzymes that might be hurting you. Another way that we can do that, besides using pH or temperature, is through soaps or detergents, which disrupt the chemical structure, as well as some very heavy metals. We're not talking music, but rather like periodic table heavy metals that actually can react with the protein itself to cause its shape to change. Because with proteins and enzymes, the shape of the protein is important for it to do its job. Right? And if you want to think about actually denaturing or changing these proteins so they can't work anymore, think about cooking a piece of meat or cooking an egg, right? If we increase the temperature of it, its actual structure changes, right? A piece of raw chicken breast doesn't have the same structure as a cooked chicken breast. Or if we cook an egg, if we fry it up, that structure changes. Right? So we've talked about carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins and enzymes. Right? We're going to spend some time on these 4 macromolecules, and then we've got one more little bit in the cell unit, and we're done. All right, so make sure that you're keeping up with everything that we've already talked about as we continue to add more stuff to it. I know that this is a bigger unit, but cells are super important, okay? If you have any questions, make sure you reach out to me via email or my office hours. Hope you have a good day.